weaponized cloning, eating toxic waste, and harnessing the power of child labor. Because today in Rimworld BIOTECH, we'll be beating the new final boss of the game by hugging our friends, making use of eugenics, and creating a god. We set out to slay the mechanoid commander and ruin the planet. BIOTECH's release has added a ton to Rimworld, but most significantly genetics, with gene lines that can be passed down from generation to generation. At the beginning, our gene line was harmless, hairless, hideous, and yellow. Everything else I'll explain later. We started with a little man named Gru, and the map was an island off the mainland, meaning people would only arrive from the north. We decided to start our base next to a safe location and began growing crops. By finishing Gru's Hooverville and naming the faction accordingly, we had an actual house, and looking at our starting scenario, we began with basic genetics and cloning. Because our gene line is sterile, we can't reproduce normally, but with cloning, we had a more efficient method. After starting to expand, a visitor showed up. He had decent skills and equipment, but with genes as basic as a pumpkin spice latte, we ignored him. That transitioned into a mad gazelle, but because Gru has kind instincts, doesn't matter. Both kind instincts and staggeringly ugly force certain traits in our gene line, and later in the game we get to splice other things. As Gru researched batteries, our first raid, Alice, drug lord. While our starting character has their own set of genes, there also exist other gene lines, each with their own traits, of which we could use to splice our own gene line. Downing Alice, we could recruit and give her all the rights of a colonist. None, because all our colonists would come from either quests and events or cloning. While Gru continued our research, we got electricity running and a transport pod arrived. Ace had the skills we didn't, so we rescued her. To add on to that, we got and accepted a quest for a refugee, who is a wonderful pyromaniac, utterly useless, and if we were cannibals, he would be meat. Still, he could cut stone blocks, so we gave him luxurious accommodations and put him to work. Ace also got an infection, so I went to execute her, if she did join. With our colony expanding, the Empire offered us a deal we couldn't refuse. To dump toxic waste in the ocean. So I refused, not because I'm opposed to polluting the environment, I mean, I play Factorio, but because we didn't have drop pods researched. The only thing better than dumping toxic waste in your backyard is dumping toxic waste in your neighbor's backyard. I mean, the planet's so big, how could we possibly pollute all of it? After getting batteries up, we were greeted by our first trade caravan. As an exotic trader, one of the goods they carry are gene packs. These act as the way we splice our gene lines with new abilities, although these ones were trash. Regardless, with Gru researching, we were able to get going on our long path to genetic ascension, starting with a clone extractor. Now, minions are born all natural, with the birds, bees, and vats of ooze. Clone extractors allow us to copy embryos from a host, who in this case is Gru. After sitting in the machine for a while, we get an embryo to turn into a human. Then we gently take that embryo and toss it in a vat. By supplying food and power, we can grow it into a fully fledged colonist with all the traits of its host. Sorta, but we'll get into that later. To prevent us from doing this a million times at once, the host gains a debuff. If we extract again before it expires, there'll be a minor side effect of death. So for now, we were just waiting on our growth vat to do its job. In the meantime, we got a betrayal offer for a refugee. If we got them killed, we'd get a whopping $250 side trainer. But I would never betray my ally for such a low price. Helping a trusted Empire friend, on the other hand, I would gladly let these traitors do it. By saving the Empire Knight, we raised our royal street cred enough to give Gru a siling. But when the bestowers showed up, I realized something. One of the BIOTECH gene lines are called Hussars, and the Empire was full of them. Hussar genes are for combat with fast healing, great fighting, and most importantly, a go-juice dependency. This manifests a permanent dependency on go-juice, the best combat drug in the game. But it also has an interesting side effect. See, dependency replaces addiction, and for whatever reason, it's actually easier to manage. So while the gene is supposed to be a weakness, it actually turns into a ridiculous strength. However, to harness this, we need some further tech and less intimidating Hussars to capture. After waiting for the bestower ceremony to commence, which took a while, Gru was given a level 1 siling. The Empire left and we returned to managing our colony. Poorly. Without food, our incubated embryo would starve, which would be terrible for the economy. We harvested some rice, hunted the local gazelles, and started on a freezer. Then my embryo almost exploded, a mad gazelle was beat to death, and another raid. A genie gene line, these pawns are great at research and crafting. This one was alright with a tiny base 20 crafting skill. They were also unwaveringly loyal, which meant we couldn't recruit them conventionally. To down him, we gently blew his head off in one shot. Accidentally. Back to the food situation, we need more growing space. Just one of these vats requires 4 times the nutrients of a normal pawn, so if we wanted mass human production, we'd need more food. On the topic of cloning, Gru's genes had regrown. That meant we could extract another embryo without killing it. But right before that, another raid from, some 40k giffer, we kited it to death and did as any sane person would do. Threw it in the ocean. During the fight though, we'd gotten a unique quest, one that we need to fight the final mechanoid boss, because now on the map was a mechanitor complex. Before BIOTECH, mechanoids were solely enemies and acted as the quintessential endgame threat. But now, instead of just fighting them, we can also build them. This is where the Mechanitor comes in, which allows a colonist to connect to and build mechanoids. They're also the only ones who can summon the 3 mechanoid bosses to the colony. To get the implant, we need to travel to the complex, but with only 3 people, we'd save that for a bit later. Right now, we were just focused on cloning because our embryo was about to become a baby. The colony itself wasn't very developed, so we added some more housing and cemented the freezer. At last, our growing embryo was ready for the big day. Wake up, babe, new social security lore just dropped. As it shot out of the vat like a womb cannonball, we at last had a healthy baby. Now, given the unique name of Minion 1, he'd inherited all of Gru's traits, and then some. Because given the conditions of his cloning, he mutated, becoming a slow healer, sterile, and hyper-aggressive. But now we could set him on the right path by giving him a wonderful childhood. Back in the vat. Babies have 2 jobs, being a dependent on my tax return and paying me child support. So we'd keep Minion 1 in the vat until he was grown a bit more and could do real work. Luckily, growth vats accelerate development by 2,000%, so we wouldn't have to wait long. Back to developing the colony, we almost starved Arcade with a power outage. Someone with dementia forgot where they were and started a social fight, and the game pleaded with me to not make a clone farm. You have more babies than beds. And a refugee also departed, and while I would normally eat them to ensure no witnesses, I let him go. So now we were down to 2 colonists and 1 baby in a jar whose only trait was staggeringly ugly. A face only a mother could love. But it just so happened that a vagabond showed up asking for money to save his life. Given he was incapable of violence, well, sleeping in the freezer, another pawn would let us accept the deserter quest. This would give us a free pawn at the cost of fighting the Empire. A free pawn who was a hussar. And to give you an idea of how strong Gojuice is, this one guy almost wiped our colony. Right now, we couldn't do anything with our hussar, but later in our tech, we could extract genes with some non-invasive methods. Until then, Robin could defend the colony, regenerating all of his wounds in just a few hours and having a base 16 shooting skill. Of course, besides that, he was completely useless. Moving ahead, we got a relic quest for a sharp stick, started research on a gene ripper, and Minion 1 was now 2 years old after 3 days. A soul trader also showed up, allowing me to use a little trick. Step 1, donate all my belongings to them. Man, we're such good people. Step 2, kill them. By donating our stuff, we increased relations just enough to keep the faction happy despite their trader's untimely demise. It also gives us back everything and more. Speaking of happy accidents, I started growing drugs. That and buying neurotramine so we could make Gojuice. And while using Gru to collect another embryo, we were greeted with a welcome surprise. The beginnings of child labor. With Minion 1 becoming a child, that meant he was no longer a useless scourge upon society. But children can only do certain kinds of work, and recreation is replaced with learning. As children grow up, they gain traits, skills, and passions influenced by how much they're learning, which is an integral mechanic in BIOTECH that we'll ignore. Because at least for right now, free labor. Despite Minion 1 being a clone, we could actually insert him too into the clone extractor to get another embryo. But given his hyper-aggressive mutation, no thanks. Remember, if he starts a social fight, he's still a child. They also have a massive mood bonus, so his room was a chair. And while he hauled stuff outside, another mad gazelle. Luckily, Cowman drew the aggro, but was incapable of violence, so he just stood there getting headbutted, ignoring the gazelle. And while walking home, he got struck by lightning. Also, remember that refugee we helped? Well, he contacted us to bestow a tiny gift, a legendary revolver and shield pack. Naturally, we did the responsible thing, and on that topic, we built a gene ripper. Right now, Robin was suffering from Gojuice withdrawal, and the gene ripper could fix it. By inserting Robin, we could extract one specific gene from his Hussar gene line, choosing his Gojuice dependency. While we waited, Gru and Minion 1 bonded like family, sleeping on the ground and getting heat stroke together. This led to Minion's first mental break, so to stop him from blowing up a battery, we arrested a 3-year-old child. Now before you say that's immoral, we immediately let him go to snort coke, which completely fixed the mood problem, at no cost. He then proceeded to stargaze for the next 12 hours straight during the day. But back to Robin in the Gene Ripper. Oh no, said someone else. A small detail I might not have mentioned, while the Gene Ripper does extract a single gene, it also conveniently turns a living pawn into human meat. By building a gene bank, we could store the Gojuice dependency gene and implant it into future clones, of which we started growing. Minion 1 also joined his brother, developing. In terms of actual progression, we expanded the common area, farmed more food, and filled our freezer. A quest also popped up to help someone being chased, which we accepted. Christina walked in, incapable of violence, but otherwise useful. Chasing Christina were imps, dubious, who as far as gene lines go, aren't very bright. We fought some of the raiders up top, but didn't notice them burning our crops down. Unfortunately, they did burn down our wind turbines, but we were looking into better power anyways. More specifically, toxifier generators. While we researched those, Minion 1 got ejected from his pod so we could increase his learning. Ace sat down with him and explained comms console etiquette, how to curse, and another secret lesson. Meanwhile, Christina was dying from an infection, with her only treatment being thoughts and prayers. Luckily, Gru was there to nudge her in the right direction. Overall, we developed the base a great deal more, but our power situation was dire. So allow me to introduce you to my new favorite addition to Rimworld: toxifier generators and pollution. Ever since the beginning of Rimworld's release, it was missing something. Sure, I could harvest organs, spawn 70,000 chickens, or encounter man-made horrors beyond comprehension, but there was always a void I couldn't fill. Until now. Now, pollution works exactly how you'd think. Toxifier generators create insane power, but pollute the area nearby. Pollution causes colonists toxic buildup and gets them sick. But with pumps, you can turn ground pollution into waste packs, which you can freeze, dump somewhere else, or my personal favorite, lob it at an enemy settlement. That being said, the minion's gene line is very special. Not only do we have toxic immunity, but also pollution stimulus. As opposed to normal pawns, ours gain a buff from being in pollution. Normally, this isn't very practical because they need to spend lots of time in pollution to max it out. So my solution, putting toxic generators in their bedrooms. By making hoarders look clean, we easily maxed out their pollution bonus. After filling the area with radioactive material, I temporarily uninstalled the generators because not all our colonists were immune. But as we get more minions, that would start to change. Which reminds me, a second baby. This one even healthier than the last, being aggressive, pessimistic, and genetically unstable, which is only sorta bad, and earning our baby the name George. Of course, it only seemed natural to throw him back in the growing pod. Much like my list of human rights violations, our base was growing. We'd walled and roofed the entire compound, began flooring, and upgraded our genetic bay. With the arrival of an exotic goods trader, we were able to buy some new genes, Optimist and Strong Melee. After inserting Gru into the pod, we could now splice our gene collection into our new clone, creating a more advanced embryo to gestate. To get more genes, we accepted some refugees, and to my delight, one of them was inbred. With a Habsburg jaw and the intelligence of drywall, this pawn was a Neanderthal, possessing a unique melee damage gene. By arresting the Neanderthal, we could use them in the gene grinder. But we were interrupted by a raid from some pig people, which would have been scary if one of them didn't have major Alzheimer's. It's not often that I feel bad about doing something in Rimworld, and this is no exception. Getting back to our prisoner, Minion 1 watched as Ace persuaded Lion to join us. Using the grinder, we could extract the melee damage gene for use in our clones. Besides cloning, we'd also need to work towards summoning the mechanoid final boss. With that mechanitor complex nearby, we'd need to travel to it soon, but stopping us was George, who'd gone from baby to taller baby. Christina wasted no time, educating him on the latest Fallout cosplay and giving him his own bed under the generator excrement. Educating children increases their learning. Of course, we also can't educate all our clones because it just takes too much time. To get those clones, we could start extracting embryos from our clones, so we chose George as our first guinea pig and added the extra genes we'd been acquiring. Sure, they'd inherit his mild cell instability, but hey, it just builds character. While we'd ironed out our infrastructure, the island itself was pretty exposed, so we began work on an outer wall. Meanwhile, we got our newest clone, Lucas, in his new crib made of bone. Wow woo woo googa. Translation. On a slightly related note, we built our very first drug lab. With Yayo and Gojuice being produced, we were preparing to supply a clone army, but right on time, a Neanderthal raid. Given we have guns and they don't, what could go wrong?
Do not come. Do not come.
I'm gonna come.
Losing George was but stealing our clone extractor, whoa, and getting a furry raid right afterwards was rough. We downed one of them, allowing us to extract his Infinity Stone, Psychite Dependency, which functions exactly like Gojuice Dependency, but for Yayo and Flake. To coincide with our cloning, we also needed to get a Mechanitor for summoning mechanoid bosses. Packing up Gru, Ace, and Minion 1 from Bootleg, Ohio, we headed to the Mechanoid Complex. Mechanitors are our mechanoid controllers. They can build, connect to, and command friendly mechanoids. To get a mechanitor, we need a special implant found at the complex. Arriving there, it was a pretty empty place, and getting inside, we quickly found a cryopod. Exploring a bit triggered a trap of just one Militor mech, but after pulling a little mech, we returned to the pond preparing for a fight. Or not. I'm sure he won't miss this chunk of brain. Implanting the mech link into Gru even called down a free hauling bot, although we'd be able to construct other mechs soon. While the group marched back to the colony, some interesting shenanigans had taken place. A quest popped up to save a colonist from manhunting cats, and a wanderer had joined. But 9 times out of 10, wanderers are spies or human-eating mimes. So I did the only rational thing. I mean, just watch as he turns. Any minute now. Okay, my bad. You win some, you lose some, and your life. But at least we got another colonist from the quest. If I had read the fine print, a 4-year-old child, Hollis was profoundly useless, but we'd keep him anyway. With our caravan getting back to the colony, we were able to clear out the manhunting cats and secure our hauling mech. As our mechanitor, Gru could now research basic mech tech, start creating friendly mechanoids, and summon bosses, of which there were 3. We need to fight the Diabolus, War Queen, and Apocryton in that order, and defeating each one would unlock the respective levels of tech. Of course, to do so, we'd need an army. With Lucas becoming a child, we immediately cloned him and stacked all the new genes we'd acquired. Instead of giving clones a childhood, we'd just start leaving them in the vat until adulthood. Because after watching Lucas get the flu, beat it with no tending, and cloud gaze outside during a thunderstorm, I was scared. On the mechanitor front, our hauler recharged for the first time, generating waste packs. In addition to toxifier generators, mechanoids also pollute the environment, so I built more mechanoids. After finishing part 1 of the outer wall and developing more of the base, we had a functioning mechanoid chamber, just as some beggars showed up, asking for free stuff. And what's more free than jail? I had hoped to send one of them to the gene grinder, but apparently he was too young, so we'd get creative. Back to improving the colony, our base was filling with pollution from generators, so I built geothermal power. Still, with a new cleaning mech being gas-jaded, pollution would increase, so we'd need to replace our current workers with toxic immune clones. To help with that, we accepted a quest from a mercenary faction who was rough, tough, and now in prison, because they had genes I wanted. As we made room for more production, we moved the growth vats elsewhere. I'm sure he won't mind. With clone production increasing, we also had Minion 1 hit a growth moment. Because of his high growth tier, we could choose from more traits and give him a passion. A raid also hit full of wastelanders, one of which we downed, giving us access to a wake-up gene. With our gene line mostly completed, the colony thriving, and outer wall being finished, we could prepare to take on the first mechanoid boss, the Diabolus. Of the 3 mechanoid bosses, the Diablos is the first. Besides being an armored behemoth, it has a massive laser cannon, get caught in the blast, and, well, I won't spoil it. Beating the Diablos also unlocks the first stage of mech tech and lets us progress towards the War Queen and Apocryton. To prepare, we need to make weapons, manufacture clones, and get interrupted by manhunting animals. But because they were just some weak cactipines, I miscalculated. Covering our retreat was an entire family and a random visitor. We were only saved when some refugees showed up and cleared the cactipines for the low cost of a near-death experience. Don't worry guys, you won't be needing those anymore. We continued preparing for the fight and gas-jaded some military mechs. After 2 of the refugees decided to join our faction, we were ready to summon the boss. Gru waltzed over to the comms console and whoa, man, that's kind of insensitive. Having aptly pissed off the 30-ton mechanoid, it was now inbound for our base. But right before it actually arrived, a shaman trader full of defenseless primitive tribals. And as they were leaving, what you doing, AI? I think you guys gotta move. Avoiding the giant red circle is really all we had to do. By dancing around the boss, we eventually chunked it down, losing nothing whatsoever. Upon defeat, the Diablos drops a signal chip, which Gru studied to gain standard mech tech, allowing us to build stronger mechanoids and get to the next boss, the War Queen. Wait. Okay, that's not good. Arresting that mercenary guest. Not my best idea. Miniguns, triple rocket launchers, and triple rocket launchers on a boomalope, plus most of them were high on go juice and yayo. I mobilized everyone to the wall, but the single-use rocket launchers were a problem. One shot and they'd kill a colonist. So new plan. Step 1, inject this clone I don't want. Step 2, inject go juice. And step 3, have your unethical plan foiled by an overdose. Okay, we'll do it the hard way. Oh, the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. With one of our best colonists gone, anger. But as we cleared up the rest of the raid, we'd acquired new armor and weapons, which was something. After extinguishing our burning crops, we captured all the downed pawns, and what you doing there, Lucas? Before all this, we'd started on component fabrication research and gotten drop pods, giving an actual use for all our masses of toxic waste packs. Relations with the Empire had been sour, so I sent them a gift. Now back to what I was saying before, the War Queen. Functionally a living tank, it repeatedly summons more mechs, meaning we'd need to rush it down. To do so, I waited for our clones to grow up and added more growth vats. In the middle of this, the 2 remaining refugees decided to betray us. It seems they were planning this all along. Some planning that was. The Empire also noticed our gift and returned the favor, shipping waste packs right back to us. Such an act would surely teach us a lesson, to send twice as many next time. Bolstering our tech, we researched the next mech level, then built a large gestator to make better mechanoids like lancers and pikemen. Unfortunately, we were running low on components and fabrication wasn't quite finished, so I did the smart thing and opened the Ancient Danger. The mechanoids weren't really an issue, but the drugged up ancients in cryosleep were. By inundating them in child soldiers, their gear and components were ours. We furnished the defenses, made Gru into RoboCop, and watched our numbers grow. Cloning was doubled and embryo extraction was getting exponentially faster. The only thing we had to do now was wait for our clones and call in the War Queen. This was it, the single strongest mechanoid in the game. After calling in the War Queen, we'd immediately go for the Apocryton, so we were in the final stretch. I'd waited a good long while to let our clones develop and extract more embryos. This meant several of them had aged to adulthood, allowing them to equip proper weapons and armor. Sorta. Something here seems a little off. I just can't quite place my finger on it. Besides awkward texture glitching, our clones' dependencies had now kicked in. So what more could we do to prepare? We'd bred an army of genetically mutated minions that were experts in combat and taking as many drugs as a Russian Olympics team. But I was forgetting one tiny thing. In our research tree, there was one tech I'd been ignoring. These wonderful inventions called war caskets. What are war caskets, you might ask? Well, by throwing a clone in the foundry, we get greeted with some options. Customizing an entire suit of armor, we could create walking metal aberrations out of pawns. But was I really going to forcibly seal someone into a metal tomb? No, of course not. Because I'm gonna seal everyone. After a lengthy process, our clones were welded shut in suits, and if any one of them wanted out, well, here's a hint. You can't. Plus, what's more horrifying than a guy in Space Marine armor hopped up in enough drugs to make him run faster than Usain Bolt? Could it be a drop pod raid? Maybe, if they hadn't dropped into our toxic waste stockpile and almost died to airborne mech feces. Luckily, our clones have no such problem. With the colony definitely stable, Gru sent hate mail to the War Queen, so she'd arrive soon. In the meantime, I crammed every adult clone I could into a war cask. Not long after, the mechanoid boss arrived. With her entourage, the War Queen is able to spawn smaller mechanoids to overwhelm us. And overwhelm, she did not. A bunch of 18-year-olds hopped up on coke versus a literal queen of the machines. She didn't stand a chance. After paper cutting the War Queen down, we immediately researched the next level of mech tech, allowing us to summon the true mechanoid final boss, the Apocryton. An infestation impeded our progress, which died very quickly. And lastly, I gave one of our clones enough explosives and rocket launchers to collapse a small country. With high mech tech researched and a mech bandish built, the Apocryton was inbound. Showing up almost immediately, it's a little angry. As a mechanoid commander, it resurrects mechs up to 30 times and lowers mood all across the map. For the mood, we had a solution. And for the mechs, sorry, Minion 3.
Bye, have a beautiful time.
But the Apocryton has another ability that makes him tough to kill. He can jump out of combat. But we have one too, and it's called walking. Because the Apocryton decided living was too good, it sprinted away from its allies, achieving the primary directive of being hit by a freight train. With the Apocryton dead, now we can get back to the real game. The thing we've actually been working towards this entire time. 572 tons of toxic waste.
I was saving it in my pocket for us to share. Let's eat. Oops.